What's going on, everybody? It's Joe from God's Eye Games here to do another Learning the Rules video for a Gunslinger's Paradise. Today we're going to be going over shooting, melee, and saves. Kind of the basic core mechanics for the combat in a Gunslinger's Paradise. We're going to go over the basics right now so you guys kind of get on the table, play the game, have a really clean understanding on what you're supposed to do once you get in those combat situations. So let's kind of just dive into it. So right now we have our bandit character and we have one of our Sioux. So in this situation, we're going to say the bandit has won his activation bidding, and he is the active character on the table. He's going to try to shoot the Sioux character with one of his actions. So what you're going to do for shooting is you're going to declare who you're shooting at. You're going to then check if there's any modifiers that need to be taken into account, such as distance, cover, maybe if anybody's playing any particular cards that might give some buffs to their character one way or the other. These are all things that you need to look at when you're shooting. There's a list in the book and on a quick reference sheet that you'll be able to check out as well. That'll give you a list of what you need to take into account there. So if you're going to have those modifiers, and then you're going to refer to the character shooting, which is going to be our bandit with his lever action rifle. You're going to check his stat block and get his aim stat. We'll say for discussion right now, it's a +2 aim. His lever action rifle is going to give him an additional +2 aim. So that's going to give him a +4. We're not going to use any of the distance modifiers or anything right now. We're just trying to go through and learn the rules. So we'll just say it's a +4 at this point for the bandit to add to his D10 roll to see if he gets his shot on target against his enemy. So just to go over this too, when you're doing the shooting phase, the first shot that you're going to fire, the first dice roll you're going to make is going to see if that shot fired is on target. Doesn't mean that you necessarily hit the opponent. It just means that the shot that you fired is close enough to where it could potentially hit and wound your target. Your opponent is still going to get a save based off of that. If they pass the save, then the action comes to an end. You made the save, the shooting sequence is over. If the target fails a save, then you would go to the damage portion of the sequence, which is where you see if the shot fired actually damages your opponent. So we're going to start from the top right here. Like I said, it's a +4 modifier to a D10 roll. You need a score of a 10 or higher to see if your shot is on target. So we'll see how bad my dice are on camera. They're like they usually are. Terrible. So in this case, you would take a 2, which is your dice roll, add the 4, and that gives you a result of a 6. That would equal a miss. And that would end your action. But since we're trying to teach you guys how to do things the right way, we're going to cheat, and we're going to say it's a 6. A 6 plus that 4 gives you a score of a 10. A 10 is considered getting your shot on target. It's good enough. So your shot is now on target. So then you would go over to your target character. So we have the Sioux Medicine Man here. I believe he's a +2 save. So what you're going to do is you're going to check the Medicine Man's stat block or whatever the target character is, depending on what list you're playing. You're going to go to his save stat. You're going to take that save stat, which is a +2, and then you might add in some modifiers to that. Like if you're behind hardcover, you might get a bonus or you might have a card to use. But like I said, for the educational purposes of the video, we're just going to stick to the stat block for teaching this. So it's a +2 plus whatever your D10 roll is. So you need a score of a 10 or higher to pass a save. Anything less than that, then the shot goes through and you weren't able to kind of get out of the way or put you in a position where it might not hit you. So, oh wow, another 2. All right, so another 2 plus his 2 for his save gives you a 4. You failed your save. We're going to go to the damage phase of the shooting sequence. But we're going to cheat again. And we'll just say I rolled a 9 this time. A 9 plus 2 means you pass the save. And if that was the case, the shooting sequence ends. You saved your bacon. You're not getting hit today or potentially hit today. And that's kind of the end of it. That's the end of the action. You move on to the next action. Or if that character who's doing the shooting is out of actions, then we go on to the next bidding phase for the next activation. But like I said, this shot ended up hitting. For argument's sake, I rolled a 2 plus the 2 save is a 4. That's a fail on the save. So we're going to go to the damage phase. So for the damage phase, you're going to look at whoever's doing the shooting and what weapon they fired with. And you're going to see a set of stat block for damage dice. This is going to be the amount of dice that you roll, and then the damage score is going to be the score that's needed on those dice for you to register a wound against your opponent. So if you have like the lever action rifle, and let's say you have a D10, and you have one D10 is what you have for your damage dice, and then you need a score of a 6+, a damage score of a 6+ to do a wound. So you have like a 50-50 shot. So we'll just roll this here. Of course, everything's coming up Millhouse. So I ended up failing the damage roll for this particular roll. So even though my opponent failed his save, doesn't matter. No wound went through. Maybe, that bullet ripped through his head feathers and didn't hit him in the head. He's okay. No big deal. But let's say I ended up rolling a 9 again. In that case, the shot would wound your opponent. You would take 1 wound off of their vitality stat. If they go down to 0 health in this situation, if they're a tier 3 character, they're just dead. Right? That's the end. They're just dead. If it's a tier 1 or tier 2 character, and we'll say they have multiple wounds, well, then you just take 1 wound off of whatever their total is. As long as they have above 0, they're still in the fight, and they're still good to go. If you end up taking a tier 1 or tier 2 character down to 0 health, they are not killed. They're what we call incapacitated. So if a character of tier 1 or tier 2 is incapacitated, they're not dead, they're just out of the fight. What this means is another character who might have the ability to revive an opponent, or you might have a card that allows that. You might be able to go up and base contact with them and give them a hit point back, get them back in the fight. So they're not completely dead. Also, let's say, this character is wounded. Maybe, whatever scenario you're playing, there might be like a victory point bonus for capturing characters, or a victory point bonus for, taking them off table, or whatever the rules for a particular scenario might be. You just shot him. It might benefit you to go up there. He's not dead. You can capture him. You can pick him up and you can take him off table, or take him to your deployment zone, or do whatever you want to do. You can capture that opponent. He is not dead. If he's killed, you have to leave him. But if he's incapacitated, you can pick him up and you can drag him back to your side. Your players from your own faction, like a fellow Sioux, might be able to come up, and if they can't revive him, maybe they'll pick him up and they'll take him off table so he can maybe live to fight another day. There's a lot of different things you could do when a character is incapacitated, and that's also all covered in the book. So that's kind of how the shooting works. It's a 3-step phase. The first part is going to be you seeing if your shot is on target. The second part of that phase is going to be to see if your target passes his save, if the shot is on target. And then if that save is failed, you go to step 3, which we check to see if the weapon is able to actually damage your opponent in that situation. And that's kind of how the shooting phase works. And like I said, there's modifiers that are going to be in the rule book as you skim through it. Sometimes it's going to be based on terrain, distance, situations. There's also an action there where you can take steady aim with your gun. You burn one of your actions, your first action, so then your second action, you get a +2 modifier right off the bat for taking an action to steady your aim before you fired. So there's different ways to where you can build that number up. And there's also ways for that number to get dragged down if you're getting a lot of distance penalties, or maybe you moved, or maybe your opponent is in cover. There's different ways to drag that number down as well. So like I said, check the modifier charts. There's also some skills and stuff that you can look at for your individual characters to kind of work with that number as well in the shooting phase. So that's kind of how shooting works, the simple, quick way to kind of go through it. Obviously, there's a little bit more to it as you read through the rule book. Next up, we're going to go over melee. Melee, it works generally the same as far as feel for mechanics. It's just a lot quicker and a lot more brutal. So what you're going to do for melee is you're going to have the choice. If you're going to have your move stat, if you can move up to, we'll say these guys are 6 inches apart. You cannot just move 6 inches and get into melee combat. It's just not what you can do. You have to be able to be within 3 inches, and then you can initiate a melee combat. So by being within 3 inches and initiating a melee combat, you can initiate melee combat. If you're just moving outside of a 3-inch range, then you can only get within 1 inch of them. It just counts. It's just basic movement rules. So you have to be within 3 inches to charge an opponent. The reason that I took that approach with the rules is because once you start factoring in guys on horseback and you start factoring in, some characters have a 12-inch move, you can just run into combat from a foot away, sometimes a foot and a half away, depending on if you're mounted up, if you might have some extra stuff going for your character. It imbalanced the game a little bit as far as how quickly you can just initiate melee combat and completely negate shooting army's set of tools. This is a much more balanced approach. This is why we went with it. So you have to be within 3 inches to then initiate a melee combat. So if you're 6 away, your first one you would move 3 inches up or whatever you wanted to move, and then your second action you would use to initiate melee combat. So we'll say these guys have now gotten into melee combat. Get into melee combat, what you're going to do is you're going to take your character's melee stat, and then if he has a melee weapon, you'll also take that melee weapon stat and you'll put those together, and that will be a plus modifier to whatever your D10 dice roll is going to be. You're going to do that for both characters. So you're going to go through both characters, find their melee stats. If they have a melee weapon, you'll factor that in as well. You're going to make an opposed dice roll. So we'll say the white roll is going to be for the Sioux. We'll give him a +4, we'll just say. And then for the bandit, since he doesn't have a melee weapon, maybe we'll just give him a +1 for his stat. So they're going to do an opposed dice roll. So it's a 6 and a 7. So the bandit had a score of a 7 once you factor in his modifiers. We'll say the Sioux had a score of an 11 once you factor in his dice roll of a 7 plus his +4 modifier. This would mean the Sioux character won the melee. There's no saves in melee combat. Melee combat is down and dirty. So whoever wins the melee roll-off, opposed roll-off, is the one who gets to check to see if they do damage against their opponent. Same way that you did it for shooting. You would look at whatever weapon you're carrying, whether it's a melee weapon or maybe you just don't have a melee weapon and you're stuck using fists. You would see how many damage dice it carries, and then you would take that die. We'll just say he's, whatever weapon you have for the Sioux right now. We'll just say it's 1 die and I need a 5 up for damage. So you would roll that, and I rolled a 4. No damage is done. They're still locked in melee combat. And then that's just it. Like, no damage is done. They would continue for the next action, or however things play out further between these two guys. So that's how you would work it. You'd take an action to initiate melee combat. You do an opposed dice roll off. Whoever has the highest score, once you factor in modifiers and the dice roll, then that would be the person who gets to roll the damage roll. If the character is hitting melee and taken down to 0, same rules as before. If it's a tier 1 or tier 2 character, they're just incapacitated. We'll just say he was incapacitated for argument's sake so we can go over it. If it's a tier 3 character, they're just dead. If you have an incapacitated character and you're in base contact with them, you have the option with one of your actions, you can just kind of execute them. Sometimes for the Indian nations, whether you're playing as Sioux, Apache, there's going to be Comanche coming up, Blackfoot, Cheyenne, once I get those lists done and released for free. Those factions, they have the option to scalp their enemies that are dead or incapacitated. And what you can do is you can take scalps, and then if you get enough of scalps, you get bonuses for your list. So that's one of the things that you can do if you're in base contact, whether it's melee or you walk up to them. You can either scalp an opponent, execute opponent. You can do a couple of different things, capture them like we talked about before, and kind of take it from there as far as how you want things to play out on the tabletop. So that's kind of one of the things that you can do while you're in melee for certain factions and certain bonuses that you might get through your characters through melee. So to kind of go over it again, you get in the base combat, in the base contact. You can only initiate a melee if you're within 3 inches and then move into base contact with the character. Or if you're already in base contact, then you can just use the melee action in the actions list in the rule book. So that's how you would initiate the combat. Then you would factor in all your modifiers, whether it's the melee stats, maybe a charge bonus, whatever extra modifiers you have. Add that to your dice roll. Do an opposed check between both players. Whoever has the highest dice roll wins the melee. No saves. You go right to damage rolls. If you damage your opponent, fantastic. If you fail to damage your opponent, you're still locked to base contact, and it's kind of like a to be continued, melee until another player is activated. When players are in melee combat and they're both okay in the situation, if you have other characters around the table, we'll say, we got Jimmy 6-shooter right back here. You can fire in the melee. There's modifiers for that. If you have, your buddy's maybe getting his tail kicked, but he's not dead yet. You can pump a few rounds into that melee and try to maybe take out the enemy before he lands that killing blow. So that's another thing that you can do in there as well, to keep that in mind during melee combats. So that's how the shooting goes, the melee goes. That's how saves work. Like I said, you have saves for shooting, no saves for melee. This is kind of the quick, down and dirty way to kind of go over the basic combat systems. As you read through the rule book, you're going to find a lot of different modifiers, a lot of different skills. If you're using the card deck, you're going to be able to use the card deck to maybe add some modifiers and some little other things as well, to kind of expand the combat experience on the tabletop. But like I said, at its core, the basic mechanics, this is kind of the basic run through of it right now. I hope this is informative. I hope this helped you guys out. Some of you might have questions or just kind of want to solidify what you already, figured out, like as you read through the rule book. If you want to see any more types of videos as far as learning the rules that haven't been produced and put out yet, like I said, just send me a message, let me know, or just, send me a message and ask me a question. I'm pretty good about getting back to people in a relatively decent time to answer the gameplay questions. So if you have any questions or anything, just please feel free to ask. I put the rules out there, but I want to make sure that people are enjoying them and playing them. Not just the way that they were intended to play, but, play them the right way so they can get the most out of the game that they just purchased. So, like I said, if you have any questions or need me to maybe, answer any questions that you're not sure about, or you just don't know, or maybe you just don't want to read the book, you just want to talk to Joe, that's fine too, man. Just send me a message and I'll try to get back to you guys as quick as possible. So thanks for watching. I hope this video was informative for you guys, and I'll catch you guys later.